Hey, everybody, welcome to module number 4. Here is where we are going to really start diving into our primary research and really trying to do some deep dive and analysis of the information that you are finding. It's super important to make sure that we really feel good about the content, because you're going to be bringing that into your paper and you're using that as justification for your own points. So it really is important that you analyze that information well, so that you are very confident in what that has to say and how that will support your position. I think also too, it's important to understand where maybe there are some shortcomings, right? Like, it's generally good, but maybe there's a little bit of something that might be a detriment, and so we're really going to be able to hold on to that and understand. And again, we're going to really be talking about, again, ethos, logos, and pathos. Logos is, information that you take in through the brain: facts, figures, numbers, statistics, illustrations, definitions, and examples. That's where you kind of take that information, you verify it, validate it. You can analyze it any way you want. You internalize it. Once you internalize it, then you agree with it, right? Logos, it's very slow acting, but it's very long lasting. Pathos is emotion. This is our heart, very fast acting, but it doesn't last very long, right? Like, you think about when you get really mad at somebody and you are just spitting nails, and then a day or two later, you're not as mad. And a week later, a month later, it's kind of over with, right? So pathos is that kind of working on the emotions of that heart of us, right? This is where we really get to engage the audience in that kind of, very guttural level, if you will. And then we have ethos. This is credibility. This is why you do or don't believe a particular person or source. These are people's based on their expertise, their credentials, those things which makes them very trustworthy. So anyway, this is our start. You can kind of see our objectives for the course for this module. And then we get into, again, our listing of activities, which, again, I really like this because I think it really gives us this nice overview of what's going on. Fallacies are super fun to look at, and there's a lot of really cool information out there about it that you'll be reading. Fallacies are intentional misapplication of logic or manipulation of the data or the argument to make your position better than what it might be, right? The one of the big problems with fallacies is that it's intentional. What you're doing is intentional, and it is meant to trick the audience, right? If your audience believes that you are committing fallacies or that you're using fallacies in your work, they lose a lot of trust in you because they believe that you're trying to manipulate them or trick them, right? We're going to learn about bias, and we're also going to learn about the Toolman method or the Toolman argument. And we have this, your book here, Dissecting the Everyday Argument. I know that in a lot of our discussions about argument, A is equal to B, B is equal to C, therefore A is equal to C, right? It's very mathematical, very logical. But the real world is much more gray than that, right? There's a lot of other kinds of issues out there. And that's where the Toolman model comes in. This is where we argue based upon the justifications and the validations of the information that we have, right? We really want to support our information. So we start off with the claim. The claim is that's your thesis, that's your argument, that's the thing you believe in, you're trying to get other people to buy into. And we support that with data, right? This is the evidence that you provide to back up that position that you have. And then the warrant is the justification of that position. Why do you believe that? What makes you so confident in it, right? Now, backing is additional information that you can provide to help back that up. Okay. So this is where, maybe you're looking at, you're looking at some other source material that kind of underpins the original argument or kind of backs up the data that you have, right? Maybe it verifies it or validates it, right? Rebuttal is where it's the counter argument. Like, what do other people say? Now, I always do like to point this out to people that when you are looking at that, you are looking at this is what they say, but this is why it's wrong or why it's faulty or why it's not the best course of action, right? I always like to remind people, though, that the more attention you give the other side, the more legitimate you're making it, right? Like you're like, oh, it's still okay, right? Like it's a legit argument. So you do have to be kind of careful how you frame that. And then the qualifier, and this is how sure you are of something, right? Sometimes, always, never, those kinds of words that really help kind of limit that information or that justification. Okay. Going back to our list here, and again, you're going to get more about the Toolman. Coming back to our list of to-dos, really gives you a lot of good information, including this video about the Toolman model. Okay. Let's go take a look at our discussion board for this module. Your initial post is due by Wednesday, February the 28th. And then Leap Day, right? Leap Day. And then, well, I guess it's the day before Leap Day. Sorry, the day before Leap Day. And then the final post or your replies to other people then will be on Sunday, March the 3rd. Okay. And I did want to make sure that I'm clarifying some of this information, because I know there was some conflicting information about the discussion boards and how they're used. This discussion board really gets into this idea of primary and secondary sources, right? And again, you've had this information before, but just to kind of refresh your memory, primary sources are those firsthand, original sources, right? So a scientist does a study, somebody goes out and does observation, somebody does an experiment, right? This is primary data. This is new information, right? It could repeat what other people have done, that's fine, but it's new information. It's new firsthand information that we haven't seen before, right? That compares to secondary. Secondary is a collection of primary or secondary sources, and this is where there's analysis and evaluation and commentary on it, right? Both of them serve a really good purpose. Primary information is really good because it's new, it's firsthand, but it can be emotional. It can be maybe too raw, too fresh, and so we don't know how accurate it is. Secondary sources, because there is that layer, that second and third look at something, it tends to be a lot more credible. Not that primary sources aren't credible, but there's people tend to believe secondary sources a little bit more. But then when you do that, you're taking out some of the emotion or the fun out of those primary sources because they come kind of clinical. And also, too, if you have too much of a bias going into your evaluation or your commentary on those sources, it's going to bleed over into this secondary source as well. So again, you want to really be kind of very conscious about which one this is and what are the limitations and the advantages of each one. Your initial post of at least 300 words, you're going to select two of the most significant sources from your synthesis grid. So that was last module, and that's where you went in and you had the different sources. You had what type of source it was. You had quote information from it, and you had some sort of commentary on it, right? So what you want to do is you're going to kind of real quickly rehash, the topic and your research question. You're going to throw that synthesis grid back up for us. And then you're going to pull two sources from there. And from those two sources, you're going to identify one of these questions. And these are the rhetorical appeals that we were just talking about a minute ago, logos, ethos, and pathos, and how were they used in that source. Once you've done that analysis, what we would like to see is you create a thesis statement that really boils down the argument of that source. What was the thing that they were looking at and doing, and how did they do that? The last piece of your initial post then is your first impression about those sources. What did you think of them? In a brief kind of, just a quick hit, a couple, 3 sentences each, explain how and why the source contributes. to your research question. Okay, what is your take? What did you think of them, and how does that apply to you? Then you're going to have two responses, right? You're going to find two of your classmates. You're going to respond to them. Each of your posts will be 150 words. And then what we are looking for then is in a really analytical post, not a I agree, or I think that was good, or I like that, or I don't like that, whatever, right? What we really want you to do then is to select two of these points. So coming down here, looking at these different ideas, you're going to select at least two of them to use as the basis of your reply to their post. Okay. Again, the real key to this is like it's an analysis. We're not arguing the topic. We're looking at the source and what is good about the source and what is maybe not good about the source. We don't need to argue whether or not the information, the examples in there is right or wrong, but it's your interpretation of that source and how it does or doesn't maybe help that person with their research question. So that'll be the first half of the module. And then the second half of the module, then we're going to get into, the writing task. We'll get into the writing task, this argument analysis. This is where you're going to analyze one of those primary sources, okay? This will be a little bit difficult, I'm not going to lie. The process will be easy, right? I think you have the skills to do that. But you're going to be looking at a scholarly journal, okay? So you're going to use that Ivy Tech library databases, the inspire.net. You have some different ways of finding that. Do not use the opposing viewpoints. Don't use those. You need to find a new journal article and that you are going to review and analyze that argument, right? And our goal then is to use the Toolman and to understand how they created the argument, and do you or don't you buy into what they are trying to say. We're not necessarily trying to say that this argument is, we're not trying to necessarily argue the topic. We're really trying to analyze the source and what was provided to you. The instructions down here really walk you through how to do all this. There's a handout. The handout looks like this, which gives you this really quick hit of your Toolman model. It's a kind of a nice little visual. And then it gives you some questions to be asking so that you can really do that analysis piece, right? As you are looking at this analysis, as you're working on the analysis, it walks you through what we're kind of expecting to see. The introduction, it gets our attention, it introduces the topic, and it gives us the name of the article that you are reviewing. That should include the author, the title, the journal, any kind of information that helps us kind of relocate that, right? And then the body of this analysis, we're really got some very specific things to be looking for, right? So we're going to use that Toolman model to analyze their claim, their warrant, their rebuttal, right? The audience and the purpose. So who was this written for? And what were they trying to accomplish, right? Were they trying to get them to change their mind or to buy into it or review or whatever, right? What was the thing they were trying to get that audience to do? How did they appeal to that audience? What were those rhetorical appeals that were being used? Logos, ethos, pathos. Were there fallacies? Were there flaws in the argument? Were there places where maybe the author didn't, intentionally or not, really use the best kinds of arguments, right? Like, were they not necessarily manipulative, but were they not the best use of or application of that? And then we have that conclusion, and that conclusion is where you kind of wrap things up, summarize what your take is, and where the author made or did not make their point, right? This is to be an APA style. Again, I know there was some confusion on our last paper because, at the very beginning of the course, the syllabus says, and on the introduction, everything was supposed to be an APA style. I know that the document that went out said either APA or MLA, depending on what the instructor said. It was clear that it was to be an APA style, but I think because the document said both, some people may have gone with MLA. That's fine, but we will be using APA style, and we want to really stick to that as we move forward. And it kind of gives you some specifics for that. And then we get to where you submit it. I really like to suggest to people to look at the rubric to see how your document will be scored, and to look at this very closely and say, here's what I'm trying to do this. Did I do this? Did I do this? It's a really good place for you to do some self-evaluation. It's a great place for you also to be thinking about some of the other options that you have available to you. Your local campus tutoring writing center, the tutor.com that we have on Ivy Learn, right? Like, we have some options for you to use. And you can always ask me those specific questions, right? Like, did I do this introduction right? Or, did I cite this correctly? Or what do you think of my thesis? Or something along those lines. Like I said before, I am more than willing to help you in whatever you need. I ask that we don't pre-grade before you submit, right? Like, I'm not going to read your paper, mark it up, and then send it back for you to correct to submit, right? But if you have very specific questions, we do want to make sure that we can answer those for you. As always, the best way to reach me is through the email. That is the best way. I can answer it at different times asynchronously. We do have our open office hours on Tuesday nights. And then if if that's not going to work for you, you can always send that email, that text message, or make that phone call, right? And you have all that contact information. Please do not suffer in silence. Guys, I hope that you have a great module number 4. This will take us up to spring break. So we're going to push really hard through this period to get us up to that. And as always, good luck, everybody.